Today, I'm trying to contextualize the film The Seed of the Sacred Fig, a film directed in secret in Iran by Mohammad Rasoulof. This family drama and political allegory is set during the 2022-2023 uprising in Iran following the state killing of Kurdish Iranian woman Jina Mahsa Amini. The film follows a family living in Tehran where the religious father Iman is a lawyer, and he becomes employed as an investigating judge during the government's crackdown against the Woman Life Freedom Uprising. The family in this film is a microcosm and an allegory of the Islamic Republic since 1979, reproduced at the most intimate scale, and demonstrates its violence and repression in the face of contestation. The message of the film is fairly explicit, but let's examine it a bit more. The Islamic Republic is built on religious values that aren't inherently bad, yet as we can see with the father, once he feels that his authority is threatened, he becomes rather ruthless. Iman is devout, anxious, and is convinced that he is simply fulfilling his professional duty. He's not there to merely investigate cases, but he is asked to rubber stamp them. He does not decide who lives or dies, rather the decision arrives pre-written. His role is administrative. These are the ways he is able to rationalize what he does. In the book Eichmann in Jerusalem, The Banality of Evil, political theorist Hannah Arendt examined the trial of a Nazi bureaucrat and argued that he was not a fanatic or a sadist, but an ordinary official who committed mass murder by obediently doing his job and refusing to think morally outside the system he served.
Als ich das erste Mal tote Menschen, tote Juden gesehen habe, war ich erschüttert gewesen. Ich habe abschließend zu erklären, dass ich persönlich diese gewaltsame Lösung schon damals als nicht zu Recht bestehend betrachtet habe, zu der ich bedauerlicherweise, gebunden durch Fahnenheit, auf meinem Sektor die transporttechnischen Angelegenheiten mit bearbeiten musste und von diesem Eid nicht entbunden wurde.
She called this the banality of evil. The idea that extreme violence is often carried out not by monsters, but by people who surrender judgment to careerism, to authority, or to procedure. Fanatics ignite genocidal projects, but bureaucrats sustain them. Religious extremism, ethno-nationalism, colonization, dehumanization, these frameworks create the moral permission structure. They might make violence feel righteous or necessary or even joyful. But without administrators, judges, soldiers following orders, and civilians normalizing it as how things are, genocide collapses. Arendt focused not only on the extremists, but also on the violence of bureaucracy, because the banality of evil is easy to underestimate, and many societies wrongly believe that they are immune to it. Like Eichmann, Iman consistently displaces responsibility onto the law, onto superiors, onto procedure, onto necessity. He tells himself that someone must do this job, that refusing would change nothing, that protecting his family requires obedience. Arendt emphasizes that Eichmann's greatest crime was not hatred, but thoughtlessness. His inability to step outside the language and logic of the system and ask whether what he was doing was right. Iman suffers from the same condition. He senses something is wrong, but he cannot confront it without collapsing the entire structure that gives his life meaning. His job, his status, his ability to provide his identity as a good man. So instead of questioning the system, he intensifies his loyalty to it. This is why his paranoia grows as the Woman Life Freedom protests escalate and his own daughters sympathize with it. Arendt shows how totalitarian systems extend this bureaucratic logic into everyday life. Rasoulof takes this one step further. Iman does not just work like a bureaucrat, he parents like one. Inside the home, his daughters become suspects, his wife becomes an accomplice or a liability, the house becomes an interrogation room. This is the banality of evil brought fully into the private sphere, and adds another layer of totalitarianism with a theocratic or patriarchal lens. What makes the seed of the sacred fig also devastating is that the father's slow descent into paranoia and madness is an allegory for the history of the Islamic Republic. The dynamics between the state and the family in the film reflect the very logic that has allowed the Islamic Republic to survive for decades. Not only through violence, but through the systematic production of unquestioning ideological loyalty of those connected to the regime, who gain access to benefits in a heavily sanctioned society. The banality of evil is exemplified in the choice of Iman as a judge. Within months of the 1979 revolution, strict ideological alignment became a requirement for access to authority, to employment, and to power. Ideological doubt was eliminated before it could even enter key institutions. In exchange for political loyalty, Iman's family receives material stability, a higher salary, a larger apartment, protection. From the beginning, the film portrays power inside the family not as belief, but as dependency. To become a judge in Iran, candidates undergo extreme ideological vetting, often extending generations back. The primary factor for selection is religious and ideological background rather than just academic achievement. The result is a coercive bureaucratic apparatus that is smaller, more homogeneous, and far more reliable. When orders come to suppress, imprison, or kill, they are carried out not reluctantly, but as a perceived moral duty. This ideological filtration has allowed the regime to survive conditions that would collapse many states: crippling sanctions, economic freefall, mass protest cycles, and international isolation. The film shows that totalitarian power does not survive because it is brutal alone. It survives because it selects its agents carefully. Iranian people have long fought for democratic and better governance. For over a century, they have organized through constitutional movements, democratic election, anti-monarchy organizing, labor unions, women's struggles, socialist and communist organizing, and fighting for greater representation for the vast ethnic and religious minorities. They have been met with a US-backed coup, US-backed monarchy, crippling sanctions, state mass murder, and repression, and today is one of the most authoritarian countries to live in due to an increasingly violent theocratic dictatorship and a sanctioned, strangled economy. In 2026, under the government's complete internet shutdown, we've seen crimes against humanity and mass murder. But that's not the first time the Islamic Republic has done this. This is a regime that in the 1980s carried out campaigns of mass executions and disappearances of anywhere from 6,000 to 30,000 political opponents, most of whom were leftists, intellectuals, scientists, artists, communists, nationalists, liberals, monarchists, and minorities. Many were murdered through secret tribunals by members who still occupy positions of power today. It is a regime that has spent decades dismantling women's movements and independent labor organizing and worker control. In 2024, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Iran concluded that the 1981-82 atrocities constituted genocide and crimes against humanity, and called for an independent international accountability mechanism. This history matters because it established a governing logic that continues into the present. Any possible dissent is eliminated. The mother, Najmeh, she manages the consequences of this arrangement. Women of her generation were often asked to reproduce authoritarian order inside the home, to discipline daughters, to absorb violence quietly, to keep the family intact at any cost. Many women resist this in their own ways to protect themselves and their children. Rezvan and Sana, like the younger generation in Iran today, fully reject the state's grammar of fear and propaganda, even when that state appears in the form of their own father. Rezvan represents a generation that has reached the conclusion that the system is irredeemable. Sana, younger and less ideological, physically interrupts the reproduction of violence itself. She doesn't seek to argue with the system, she rather seeks to remove its weapon. Today, the daughters represent a generation that sees other worlds and possibilities on a daily basis, which is precisely why the state censors the internet and isolates Iran from the outside world. The film weaves its fictional narrative with real footage from the 2022-2023 protests that were met with mass arrests, torture, sexual violence, and killings. When Iman says he no longer feels safe in his own home, he is speaking the language of the regime exactly. The state survives by convincing its agents that danger is everywhere, even in their own children. Sadly, sanctions generally restructured power in favor of further dictatorial tendencies of most countries that are sanctioned. By strangling the economy, sanctions reduce the range of viable choices available to ordinary people, making it harder to get medicine, food, and access to basic goods. Sanctions are proven to restructure power in favor of corruption and patronage. In that context, the state becomes one of the only remaining sources of security, employment, and protection. This does not produce genuine or absolute belief, and we can see Iman internally struggles with the morality of rubber stamping the execution or imprisonment of prisoners without a real trial. But the system does produce dependence, as we can see Iman wants to protect and provide for his family, and is willing to make any sacrifice of obedience necessary. Properly functioning international mechanisms that could intervene to stop genocide, totalitarianism, or nationalist or religious extremism would help much more than sanctions. But these mechanisms are severely weakened by selective usage by NATO countries to serve their own geopolitical interests, and also by veto power in the UN. Today, the Islamic Republic functions like a political undead, neither fully alive nor seemingly collapsible from the inside. It survives successive uprisings not through legitimacy, but through engineered loyalty, repetition, bureaucratic following of orders, coercion, and fear. This is why the film feels increasingly claustrophobic. What The Seed of the Sacred Fig shows is the end point of that closure, a society with no parallel authority, no space for organized opposition, and no space for reform. This is why the film ends not with their victory, but with real protest footage. The daughters are not symbols of hope because they win. They are symbols of rupture and proof that the system can no longer reproduce itself through families. The regime has weapons, prisons, courts, but no trust, no consent, no moral authority. The last shred of legitimacy it had, that of protecting the security and integrity of the nation, is gone. The gun circulating through the family mirrors how violence circulates through Iranian society. That the youngest daughter ultimately controls it is critical. When the youngest daughter takes the gun, she does not become violent, rather she becomes responsible. She fires not at her father, but at the ground beneath him. The film does not end with victory. We do not know what will come next. What is scary is this totalitarian system and imperialist systems have not allowed for a hopeful resolution. I hope I'm wrong and Iranian people can have a better life, the one that they've fought for and hoped for at least a century through successive social movements.